There are lots of bones to pick with modern and organized religion. From my experience, I've concluded that the main two reasons that most people stay away from organized religion, at least here in the US, it boils down to two issues: hypocrisy dealing with the church's doctrine and various concerns over money. The religious hypocrisy conversation tends to be deeply personal, and it varies based on the denomination of the religion that you're talking about. But there is one aspect of the money thing that I could never figure out when it comes to the modern American Christian church.
We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study? We know more than ever before, but who knew bias was the bane of all you study?
Like I mentioned in the cold open, for many men, the aspect of the tithe, a regularly scheduled financial gift to the church that is responsible for its operation in one way or another, it's a deal breaker. Many men can't get past the concept that aspects of the church's operations, including the livelihood of the leaders of the group, is made possible by their support. Historically, and not just in this country, there are centuries of stories of rich churches that are built on the backs of the poor laity. Indeed, there's an actual scripture in the New Testament where words associated to Jesus himself lauds and applauds the actions of a poor elderly woman who donates her last 2 coins to the temple. Among other things, Jesus says that she's given more than the wealthy people gave out of their wealth, precisely because they were her last 2 coins. I myself have heard this scripture used as a way to encourage people to give to their church in an irresponsible way. Typically, the faithful person will take on the attitude that God will provide though they don't see a way. And if that some way comes through, they will credit that to God. And if God doesn't come through, then they will either get disillusioned with the concept and rethink their worship, or sometimes they'll even double down in their faith, blame themselves, and be even more irresponsible. I've seen that too. Even at my most religious in my faith, I reasoned that the way God took care of people financially was for them to act wisely. By following other scriptures concerning money, some of them famous, I concluded that practically following scriptures from the Old and New Testaments that warn against debt or the love of money was the protection. Because surely other people who didn't follow what God said about those things would have outcomes that weren't desirable. And that's really the point of this video. I always wondered why American churches, with how important the financial aspect of everyone's life is, with how much Jesus talked about money, with how the love of it is the root of all kinds of evil, including and especially within the church itself, why in the world don't churches take the time to make their congregations more economically literate? Churches are responsible for commendable in-house programs that cover everything from the fidelity of monogamous marriage to promoting education to getting treatment for addiction. Some churches will even have members who are, or contacts to get to, psychological therapists. But with all of those forward-thinking programs to help their community survive the cruel, sin-soaked world, they will leave the average pew warmer completely ignorant as to how they can make sure they can have what they need to live in the modern Western world. If you've seen any of my videos where I mentioned that the group that I was a part of, I mentioned that though I stopped short of calling that group a cult, many people have leveraged that word against them. The reason why, in as short a time as I can explain it, is we were encouraged to give other people incredible amounts of access into our personal lives. What I mean is this: under the influence of different biblical scriptures that talked about seeking advice and counsel and generally being wise, not to mention being open about the sin concept, we would regularly tell people what we were doing or attempted to do. For example, I may tell a brother in the church about how I looked at adult content, confessing it, and we would pray together about it, James 5, Some of you may hear this and you think, well, that's no one's business. And on the other hand, if you're religious, maybe you see that as a positive, where the sin that a Christian should fear doesn't take root within the congregation. We're not trying to be hypocrites. But no matter where you stand, the point is this group talked about everything, or at least almost. Because money and politics, they were the touchy subjects. I was encouraged to confess that I looked at adult entertainment in an effort to keep my soul pure, but a person could buy a Porsche and no one would bat an eye. This video isn't about church and politics, but likewise, if people knew how you were going to vote, that would betray how you felt about certain social issues, right? What if you had major anti-racism convictions, but the candidate that you thought wasn't a racist was also pro-choice? That's why we never talked about politics in church. It exposed how complicated these things can be. Anyway, back to money. Money would only come up when the church fell short of its goals. Scriptures like the one I mentioned before about the old woman, that would be read, the congregation would respond, and everything would be okay for another season before they had to do it again. I was in a church in Philadelphia where some people really struggled financially. Just regular Philadelphians, regular people. There were some members of the church, however, that actually were wealthy. They were either given advantages in life, or they took advantages in life, or a little of both. The point is, they didn't struggle with money. I always wondered, why couldn't people who knew their way around the Western economy have a seminar where they shared that with other members of the church? Why did our church leadership never warn the congregation to say, stop going into debt for Christmas, for example? You would think that would be a slam dunk no-brainer. Shouldn't every preacher in America get up to the pulpit all throughout the month of December talking about the idolatry of materialism that surrounds Christmas Day? And how it makes a mockery of everything we were supposed to be celebrating. I went to church every Sunday and Wednesday for 25 years, and though I've heard many line in the sand stances said there, I have never heard any sermon like that. By the time I joined the Army, I had been a member of that church for about 7 years, from age 16 to 23. I learned about the Roth IRA while I was in the Army. As a young man in the church just starting life, we constantly talked about sex and respect and discipline. But like I said, they were content to leave a young man completely in the dark about what really made the world go round. Perhaps perspective was the problem. Maybe people in the church just assumed that such financial lessons came from parents. But my church was, in particular, it addressed what parents taught us all the time, especially about God. When we studied the Bible with people to convert them to our church, half of it was the deprogramming of what their parents taught them about Christianity to what we believed about Christianity in the Bible. Why stop there? Even when I was religious, I came to the conclusion that any church, anywhere, anytime, in any era, when it struggled with not following God, that congregation tended to have the same social struggles as their countrymen. It makes sense, doesn't it? I used to say, and you religious people who watch this, you'll kind of get the lingo. The first century church in Jerusalem tended not to struggle with paganism, and the first century church in Rome tended not to struggle with legalism, because that's not who either of those peoples were, So if you have a Christian church in the United States, what are they going to struggle with? Among other things, the idolatry of materialism that surrounds how Americans view money. Finally, the word holy means set apart. The church was always supposed to be set apart from the world. People should go to a church visiting, talk to the people, watch what they do, and know they're not in Kansas anymore. I submit that American churches fail to be set apart due to attitudes concerning money more than any other issue. Worse than that, it's not just the US, of course. It's a story as old as the religion itself. So if anybody out there that leads a struggling church is watching this video, maybe you should actually teach your congregation how to practically build their house on the rock. I'm Odium. This has been Message in a Bottle. Come back for the next reflection.
All the bond leaves of the mind. But what what's real or what's right has so little to do with those minds. All the bond beliefs of the